Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I just wanted to say welcome to Lockdown Movie Reviews. I'm your host, Colin Dawson, and this is an absolutely wonderful time. I'll be honest, I've heard so much about this. I've heard that it explains my city so well and everything. And it's an older movie, again, but we're coming a little bit closer. We're going to be looking at another one here in just a while that I'm going to get to see. And we're going to go to the movies before they're locked down. As it is, this one here, A Clockwork Orange. It's an old one, and I will say it's not made for kids. And I will say it has an excellent review of characters, top notch actors. It has a young Malcolm McDowell and several others. Anthony Burgess. Malcolm McDowell plays the main character, Alex. Patrick McGee, Mr. Alexander. David Pross, Julian. Michael Bates is the chief guard. And several others out throughout there. Very numerous people. And it is, without a doubt, probably one of the greatest movies that I've ever seen. It has a lot of symbolism throughout it, pop cultural movies, and while everyone says that it's set in London and everything, and it is set with a lot of everything that could be very British, very into the hippies and hippie movement throughout it. One has to look at the fact of how much it has things interlaced and over everything with it. It has basically one of the most ironic scenes in it, where basically a bunch of young vigilantes go out, and this one guy, Alex, Malcolm McDowell's character, is their leader. And they start off, and to me, it was very obvious that they started off trying to take back their area, their territory, what was their old ways, and everything else. And due to even it being a Clockwork Orange, saying that it is now time for this group or place to be labeled orange and to be kind of taken over from the Roman situation, and saying that they had totally broken the area in the same way that they would have back in the day. Any of the Jews having to wear the orange uniform or anything else and keep something orange on them. And there's a lot of Nazi sub overtones and Nazi army militias, so to speak of, in a way. And to see how it's really taken over society from my perspective on it. And with it, these four young hooligans stay in one of these very ritzy, high-end, I guess you could say like a family home or mansion that's just been totally destroyed, and everybody else lives in these little bitty flats that's basically all you would ever need. And they go around beating up a lot of the people that are kind of the bad people, so to speak of. And this is what they've all seen, is everyone's just been brainwashed, beaten down, everything else. And they go out and they take care of some of the old war veterans when they finally took over. And then they went over to a big theater place where this guy wrote lots of propaganda, everything else. And the ones that followed him go back to this little area where he started out at. And they take women in there and they rape them. And this is not something for kids. This is very adult movie here, because it shows a lot of it out there with what they were trying to do. And then they went over and beat up these five guys, 5-on-4. They had knives in their little clubs, and basically, in a way, a symbolization with how they were taken from being men and women, and that they weren't the divided tribals or anything else. And they had the eyeshadow on one side, or the lashes, and they had these huge kind of like protection diapers that's like for boxers, so they won't get hit in the nuts, so that they'll be necessary to have kids, and no one's going to take that away from them. And they go and they beat up these five, basically what would be like the 70s neo-Nazis before they had the skinheads really come along. They were trying to rape this woman. And then they went to this guy's house. That was the one that wrote all these books, wrote everything else, and all this literature, and gave him his wife and him 1-4. And they were all in disguise and everything else, and it talks about it through the whole movie. Then they come basically home, everything else, go through everything, and to Alex, this is a way of life for him. He's not going to give up anything, and that's just how it's going to be for him. He goes, and these guys, you can say they have too much rough, too much whatever it is, and here comes the irony. It basically, he goes to the one that has all the big money, and they talk about how they're going to be robbing the house and everything else, and all the big money with it. And that's what people think, but if they were really robbing the house, they wouldn't have gone and sought out the lady, and she's the old cat lady down the street that has all the money that no one's ever going to say anything, that's been financing all this, the root of all evil. And as such, he goes in there, and true enough, sex is one of the things that, if you have that, generally it shows there's going to be a punishment later. There's this huge fallacy of a penis, a phallic symbol, on the dresser as he comes in and confronts the woman. And she says it's a couple of miles down the road, which makes it seem very, makes it seem very American in a way. And he hits it, and it rocks back and forth. And she kind of comes at him. He uses it in between them, and he hits her. He kills her, and everything. And I'll go back a little bit here. Shortly before, there was a gang mix-up between them, that they wanted to change leadership. He didn't want to give over leadership, and he wanted to still pick the targets. So he said, we'll pick your all's target, after he went and disciplined two guys, and the youngest one of them basically was like, I'm not really worth that. They took something, looked like a milk jug or something, and clocked him over the head after he came out and said, we got to get going, the police will be here. And they set him up and left him there. He went to prison and everything, and they showed things throughout there with him being processed, everything else, arrested, all of that. And he went for an experimental treatment to remove all the tendencies of violence and everything else from him. Even though you could possibly say he was a freedom fighter in all of this. Someone who was trying to keep the Nazification of his country and the last few remaining people in the, quote, fringe areas of society, wherever it be at, the gutters, the new music that people don't like, people hanging out in the old aristocracy buildings that are since abandoned and everything. Through this, he thought that he would get out early. He made the chaplain his friend, everything else, and moved right along through it. They did all sorts of treatment to him, everything else. Certain things were there in it. It showed Holocaust camps, everything else, and all of this, and took him away from everything out there. And in a way of it, if you look at this simplisticness, there was a 5-person rape by basically French to German troops that would have been under Napoleon, saying that they were masoning a woman. It's really old war things from back then in the day. And he was supposed to find that repulsive, so he had never used violence on that. Then he was supposed to watch Hitler at a concentration camp with one of Beethoven's symphonies behind it. And he would say that that's just wrong, the music. It's disgusting. It was sick. Music shouldn't be associated with it. But yet at the same time, he was being brainwashed to not do anything against anything to be like the Holocaust. At the end of all this treatment and everything else, with the special brain chemicals, eye drops, eyes being opened, and neural sensors being put on to feed the brain proper energy in the right direction, he was put on stage before everyone, including the chief guard. It was very, very telling. There was many things out there where they would have to lick the boots of people in the French Revolution or the March of Napoleon across Europe. And then there's a few insults given from World War I, World War II, and then just regular things out there. And as soon as he would think about standing up for himself against a person, he would gag and look violently ill, fall down, and he would eventually lick the soles of the shoes of people. And then they had this blonde woman walk completely naked over to him. And as soon as he thought about touching her or anything else, he got so close and then he fell straight to the ground, gagging and looking as though he'd be sick. The treatment was considered a success. He was sent back. He was in all the papers. His parents had rented out the room, the lodging, everything else. He had no place to go. Some of the old veterans that had finally taken over and taken the town, he was thrown out there with his suit and everything. They then had their, old man beat down on him because he couldn't do anything to defend himself. And 2 of his buddies from the gang that he had to set straight went out there and had become police officers. You could say these were 2 or 3 of the more violent people. After all, they were turned against their own morals or whatever it is, and then use their natural violent tendencies, saying, it takes a thief, it takes a murderer in order to be a police officer. And then came back around, and now they're part of the establishment. And they took him out and tried to drown him in a old setup thing that they had very far off the road and everything else. And he was sitting there trying to talk to them nice and everything, like he was programmed to, asking where they would take him. And they tried drowning him in this, symbolizing a type of baptism in a way unto his new life. Then he left from there, nearly dead, beaten, crawling over to this one house where his friends had already ratted him out because they were in disguise. And it was the house of the writer that had started a propaganda for everything. And they brought up some reporters and everything else to pretend that they were there for him. He had a really strong man there with him now because he's crippled and in a wheelchair. You can leave up the judgments for yourself there. He then was taken over and put in a bath, given wine, everything else. They insisted that he drink more. He told them about how he was insanely pained by that one Beethoven symphony. And they put him up there after he passed out and been drugged with the fake reporters for everything and tortured him with it until he tried to commit suicide and jumped out of the house. He was in a body cast when he woke up. At the hospital, his parents were like, "Don't worry, now that you're like this and we know you're cured and we can control you, you can come back and live with us." And he said, "What makes you think you're welcome here or I want you around?" Saying that he'd rather be homeless than with them for them being a sellout. And true to form, he was a thing of the government. It had been in all the papers, everything else. And this one person was supposed to mean harm unto him and everything else. And it's like, don't worry, we took him away. All those people are gone. Everything's gone. But then we're going to have to think about what to do with you. And they put him through a couple of video things and everything else. It's like, just answer whatever the first thing is comes to your head. So he went through all of that and everything. And he answered honestly. And a couple of them were like he's back to his old self. A couple others are not. So it's like hit on the head, cognitive whatever. And true enough, he's just laying there, kind of like being the fatted calf. He's gotten the head cast off. He's gotten everything else off. He's going to be out. His arms are immobilized and his legs are in smaller casts. And the actual, I guess you would say the equivalency of the governor of the area, came over and took the nurse's place and started feeding him food. And saying, "I'm not really sure what we're all going to do with you. And we're going to figure out something and we're going to be all in front of the papers. And we're going to take care of you because we've done a great wrong to you and everything." So as he's feeding him, showing him his kind of like the fatted calf for the media then sets up a couple of picture background things for the flashes they used to have in the 70s and stuff. They bring in the media and everything else, and they see him with the hand right behind him, and he's waving, and he has a smile on, and he grabs him and pulls him forward that little bit as the body cast is kind of still there, and it's choking him. He's frozen with a smile on his face, and at the end of it, it says he finally goes to heaven. In his own voice, Malcolm McDowell's, the character Alex, and he's finally in heaven with his blonde-headed woman, I think the same actress, just with longer hair. And the politician is taking the place of every single person because it's trickled up from the very bottom. The homeless, vets, there were basically Nazis. The underground shopkeeper for the music that he listened to, making the money off of the people, up to the writer and the fans of the writer, and then the money of the high society, and then saying in some way she must have made a donation with it to a political party after her death. But her cats were probably taken care of. And then you realize who Mr. Bigglesworth is that 007 was probably going after. in a weird way out there with everything. And the politician is now all of them, for it to trickle back down and be solidified in all of society as the last son of hope was removed from society and everything. And even though it seems like there's no moral compass in the movie, one just has to look harder and say it looks a little different. Now, I'll be honest, I was told about this movie by a person of the Third Reich. His descendants and everybody else live here and work with the national government at the highest level. And it is just so funny, ironic, and to the truth. And I have to say, the acting in it is spot on. I know people around here who fuss that it didn't win an Academy Award, still to this day, that could never have been old enough to even see it in movie theaters. And this is a definite R-rated film. It leaves little to the imagination over what's going on, and you just have to look about how it really works and goes. In A Clockwork Orange, while I would love to say in a conspiracy theory thing here, it's how Mussolini's family moves around the entire world to all the allies and everyone else out there and anyone on his country's enemies list with it all through it. And in a way, it is a beautiful portrayal of what a lot of people in the counterculture say they see all the time, with the hypocrisy of following the enemy of whatever war they won against or anything else, and saying, did you look in the mirror? You've really turned into them. With all of it, I would say definitely if the person was at the right age, they should see this movie. It is beyond, without a doubt, a masterwork of cinema, acting, and the positions that they put themselves into in this movie have to constitute some of the most wildest parts of the imagination and just sheer mental stamina to make themselves go through this, go through everything, and to make themselves reach that level of, I can do this, and it be thought of as real, useful to the scene, to the acting. I will say on it, I think there was one or two times that the camera was put in a different area, and it's very British for the time to show the humanity of the individual going away with some of the close-ups that it had on it. Some of the situations out there where in America it would be like it's left away and then there's the individual that goes off that's the flat character that isn't really there. And one of the things I can say as an example of it is the fourth one of the gang. I can't remember the character's name right now. He only had one speaking part in it, I think, and was a background character, and to show that youth will just go their own way and live under the society that presents itself to them. And with that, I know that's very telling in the way that USA cinematography does, with kind of the person goes off and it's like, well, he's just going to be a joiner of society, but they will cut away and see that and make it go across and follow them for that amount of the picture. And it's a very interesting way if you ever want to study how camera situations are meant for the individual over no speaking and kind of almost like an extra with the humanity that they can show for their individual separation for their part of society that's very British in unto itself. And it seems like it doesn't flow really well, but once you understand that in British cinematography versus USA cinematography, it really sticks for it. And yes, it's a Stanley Kubrick film, so there's a lot of situations in it that are very artistically understanding, such as the Snake of Eden and everything, symbolizing sex. And then the snake, well, it had an accident. And I will say there is a book that you can read over it that goes a little bit deeper into some of it and explains some of the parts. And I know this is probably a big spoiler, and this is a very long analytical situation, but it is a very, very good movie. And I recommend it for anybody so long as they're at the proper age to see it. And if you do decide to see it, don't turn away from it, no matter how hard it is. And just be prepared to see it. Colin Dawson with Lockdown Movies. Like and subscribe.